chapter of St. John, beginning at the first verse. As Jesus walked along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Jesus answered, "Neither this man nor his parents sinned. He was born blind so that God's work might be revealed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world." When he had said this, he spat on the ground, made mud with the saliva, and spread the mud on the man's eyes, saying to him, "Go, wash in the pool of Siloam," which means sent. Then he went and washed and came back, able to see. The neighbors and those who had seen him before as a beggar began to ask, "Is this not the man who used to sit and beg?" Some are saying, "It is he." Others are saying, "No, but it is someone like him." He kept saying, "I am he." But they kept asking him, "Then how were your eyes open?" He answered, "A man called Jesus made mud, spread it on my eyes, and said to me, 'Go to Siloam and wash.' Then I went and washed and received my sight." They said to him, "Where is he?" He said, "I do not know." They brought to the Pharisees the man who had formerly been blind. Now it was a Sabbath day when Jesus made the mud and opened his eyes. Then the Pharisees also began to ask him how he had received his sight. He said to them, "He put mud on my eyes, then I washed, and now I see." Some of the Pharisees said, "This man is not from God, for he does not observe the Sabbath." Others said, "How can a man who is a sinner perform such signs?" And they were divided. So they said again to the blind man, "What do you say about him? It was your eyes he opened." He said, "He is a prophet." The Jews did not believe that he had been blind and had received his sight until they called the parents of the man who had received his sight and asked them, "Is this your son, who you say was born blind? How then does he see now?" His parents answered, "We know that this is our son, and that he was born blind. But we do not know how it is that he now sees, nor do we know who opened his eyes. Ask him. He's of age. He will speak for himself." His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jews, for the Jews had already agreed that anyone who confessed Jesus as the Messiah would be put out of the synagogue. Therefore his parents said, "He is of age. Ask him." So far, the second time, they called the man who had been born blind. They said to him, "Give glory to God. We know that this man is a sinner." He answered, "I do not know whether he is a sinner. One thing I do know, that though I was blind, now I see." Here ends the gospel for the day. Please be seated. I feel a little hypocritical saying that was the end of the gospel, because the gospel actually is 41 verses long. I just cut it in half because if I kept reading, there might not be time for the sermon. We would just read the gospel. But we will cover what is included in those other verses in the sermon. This is a very interesting gospel. It's a very long one. But it's interesting as it is a lot of comparison to the one we had last week. In last week's gospel lesson, we had Jesus meeting the Samaritan woman at the well. Again, somebody without a name, somebody who was there and met Jesus for the first time, never met him before, and by the end of the day is one of his apostles, and actually is more than that, is also spreading the gospel. Jesus and his apostles are walking probably in the temple area because the man born blind probably was there begging, because there was no welfare system at that time. And so if you wanted to eat and you were blind, probably couldn't do something other than beg and hope somebody was generous enough to give you enough to eat for the day. So we have 6 scenes in this gospel text today, and they are interesting in their own light, but they are also interesting because they reflect something so common, so much that we are aware of today. It's like yesterday's news. The first scene has Jesus and the apostles coming and meeting the blind man. What is interesting in this case is there's 2 different responses. And when we respond to people, we have 2 different responses practically all the time. We can do one or the other. We can deal with the need, or we can ignore the situation entirely. The man is there probably asking for a donation. And the first response from the apostles is to ignore him entirely. Now, they carried some money in their purse. They probably could sit down and agreed among them how much they should give this beggar, if they give him anything. But they get in a discussion of who sinned that caused this man to be born blind. Now, was it parents, or was it grandparents, or something that he did? Who was it that blinded him, caused him to be blind? Jesus responds differently. He sees a need, and he attempts to meet the need. The person is blind. He needs something. But he gives him more than something that will just aid him for the day. He gives something that will give him new light. A whole different kind of life. The ability to work again. 2 different responses. And when we meet people, it's very important how we meet them. Always willing at least to give them some time so we can understand if there's something we can add to their life, or we can simply ignore them. You see somebody by the side of the street? No, I better say, I see somebody by the side of the street. And it's very easy for me to make excuses not to give them anything. Or to give them very little, not deal with it at all. It's very easy for me to have a little pool of money with the Elgin Ministerium, because somebody calls on the phone and they need something right away. It's easy for me to say, oh, well, we have to take a vote on it. We don't have that money available, but go to the Elgin Ministerium and they can probably deal with it, because they're issued money from us to distribute to people who need it. To respond with an ear for hearing some cry within the soul of another person, or just to ignore it. We always have that capability. And yes, we can do it on a governmental level. If you go to the airport this morning, there are probably people outside the airport door waiting in line to go through TSA. They aren't getting paid. They aren't getting paid. And the people responsible for it are sitting in Washington, D.C., arguing with each other and pointing fingers and saying, oh, those poor people aren't getting a paycheck, it's your fault. And they're saying, no, it's your fault. See, that's the way people respond. It's a simple solution. You give them their paychecks. Congress can decide to do that. You see how it becomes so relevant if we think about it in terms of now? The second scene is the people bring, or the man who's been healed goes back to his neighborhood. Now you would think that the response of the neighbors would be to rejoice. They say, man, this is great. And if they would ask the question, who did this? They would say, oh, we want to speak to him. That's marvelous. What do his neighbors do that have known him all his life? They say, well, you sure you're the one? Are you sure? You look like you could be the one, but, and some said, no, somebody looks just like him. And neither one of them, none of the people respond to him with any joy. And they share the blessing that is reserved, or find out who did it, so that they might receive some corollary blessing. Sometimes, well, you might think that a person that wins a lottery is forever blessed to have people rejoicing with them. Exactly the opposite is true. Most of the people who win lottery wind up having to leave their neighborhood because people expect more from them. They change. See, the neighbors felt a lot more comfortable having him being blind because they knew how to deal with that. And he couldn't rejoice at his healing because that changed who they were. You know, we do that. We don't share joy with people. It's much easier to share suffering, and that's important too. But to share joy and to rejoice when something happens positive. And what is amazing to me is some people will leave one church and they'll find in another one just what they needed in their religious worship. And the place they left is upset. Say, well, they weren't much good here. Probably good they left anyway. Can't rejoice in the fact that they found something that was important to and changed their life. The third scene is they bring him before the religious authorities. The religious authorities, wouldn't you think they would want to know the details? Well, they respond very negatively. And they start asking about the person who did it. And whoever it was, he must be a devil because he's breaking Jewish law. He healed on the Sunday. On Sabbath, excuse me. Now, that person ought to be dealt with. No rejoicing at the fact that the man in front of them was now seen. But let's get even with the guy who did it because he did it under rules that we don't approve of. So let's penalize the person who tried to help. And if you've ever tried to help somebody, very often you wind up finding out that people didn't appreciate the help. One of the things I can say that I've had this experience from our bishop who we left a year ago. So he said, you shouldn't be involved in other congregations. You shouldn't be supporting other ministers who the bishop disciplines. You're out of place. He said, they're my neighbors. I know. I've known them for a long time. And I care about them. Well, you should be punished for what you did. The religious leaders there called the man to testify. He did. And they didn't believe him. The fourth scene is the authorities talk to the parents. Well, let's see if we get the same story from the parents. Now, you think that the parents would be very, very interested in supporting their son. And they do say, yes, that's our son, and he was healed, but beyond that, we don't know anything about it, nor do we want to know anything about it. You see, there was a law there by the Judeans that if you made some positive statements about Christ, particularly if you said that he was a Messiah or a prophet, you were eliminated from the temple. So let's not put ourselves at risk, even as own parents. Sometimes you found that your closest friends or your parents or children didn't support you when they really should have. Well, don't get upset. That's normal. That's normal behavior for people. Unfortunately, sometimes it's from those who are extremely close. People simply don't want to get involved. There was another wild gunman at Old Dominion College. The ROTC people rushed him and subdued him immediately and avoided a real catastrophe. Each one of them risking their life, each one of them wanting to get involved. And so unusual, but so honorable. The fifth scene has authorities bringing him back again. Once again, interrogating the blind man. And the blind man responds and said, I told you once before, you asking me again, do you want to worship him too? And they said, how dare you say that? We worship Moses. We worship Moses from time immemorial. And you, a sinner, telling us that we should worship somebody else? Who are you to say that? The authorities are in a bind. If they make some affirmation that this man was something more than just an ordinary Christian, and somebody who should not be subjected to hate because he healed on Sabbath. But they wanted simply to evade any kind of making contact with the person who had done the healing. The final scene, and we didn't read it, but the final scene has the person who was born blind approached by Jesus again, and he asks him if he is interested in the Son of Man. And the blind man responds and I don't know who it is. And Jesus says, it's me. And the person worships him. The blind man is changed. And from that spot, he moves like the Samaritan woman to witness to Jesus, to others. There's one interesting thing here, and it has to do with evangelizing. This man didn't have any religious training. He had not been with the rabbis. He probably didn't know the law that well, but he witnessed to Jesus. One of the reasons that people give me to say they can't witness to Jesus is because they're not scholarly enough. They haven't studied enough. They can't really make an argument. Take a lesson from the blind man, because the blind man wasn't trained either. He knew very little about theology. But what he was an expert in was himself. And he understood how his life had been changed. How his whole idea about life and about God had changed. Because he knew who he was and what God meant to him and what Jesus in his healing did for him. See, you don't have to have a master's in theology. You can witness just on the basis of what Jesus means to you when you talk to other people. It doesn't have to be a big theological debate and argument. As a matter of fact, that gets in the way most of the time. Simply say, I was once blind, and now I see. I don't think you can make any more powerful acclamation or witness than that. Amen. Hymn of the day. All right. Amazing Grace. 779. Well, that's in your book. Amazing Grace.